He wasn't dying from his wounds, and that was the part no one could explain. The monitors said his heart was still fighting, steady but strained, like a soldier refusing to fall out of formation. Yet something unseen was pulling him under inch by inch, breath by breath. In a quiet hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled air, where the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and cast a pale, unforgiving glow across the still figure of Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole. 20 doctors had already come and gone, their voices low, clinical, careful not to promise anything they couldn't deliver, each one leaving behind a different theory but the same conclusion, that whatever was happening inside his body did not belong to anything they could name. And that was what unsettled them most. Outside the glass, the hallway stretched long and silent, broken only by the distant squeak of rubber saws and the occasional murmur of late-night staff. But inside that room, time felt suspended, like the world had narrowed to the slow rise and fall of a man who wasn't supposed to be losing this fight. Ethan had survived worse. Everyone knew that. The kind of missions people didn't talk about in detail, the kind that left marks you couldn't always see, except for the one etched into his right arm, a faded tattoo of a German shepherd, ink worn soft with time, but still unmistakable, still a symbol of something deeper than memory. And at the foot of the bed, unmoving except for the subtle shift of breath, sat Rex. He wasn't pacing, wasn't whining, wasn't doing any of the things people expected from a dog watching its handler slip away. He was watching, ears forward, body still, eyes locked with a kind of focus that felt almost human, as if he understood something no one else in that room did. A nurse had tried earlier to lead him out, gently, with a soft voice and an outstretched hand, but Rex hadn't resisted, hadn't growled or snapped. He had simply stepped back, just enough to keep his position, just enough to make it clear that he wasn't leaving. Not now, not for anything. There was something in the way he held himself, something deliberate, like he wasn't grieving yet. Because the story wasn't over, because somewhere in the silence between each beep of the monitor, he was still searching for an answer. Midnight crept closer, and with it came another doctor, younger than the others, her expression tight with the weight of too many unknowns, clipboard held close as if it might anchor her to certainty. But even she hesitated when she stepped into the room, her eyes drifting not first to the patient, but to the dog. "He's been like that for hours," the nurse whispered, her voice barely more than breath, as if louder words might break something fragile in the air. The doctor nodded slowly, stepping closer to the bed, checking the lines, the vitals, the same routine every other doctor had followed, each one hoping to see something the others had missed, but finding only the same steady decline. And then Rex shifted. Not much, just a slight tilt of his head, a tightening of his posture, like a signal too subtle for anyone who wasn't paying attention. His gaze dropped, not to Ethan's face, not to the monitors, but to his right arm. The tattoo, the place where ink met skin, where memory had been carved into flesh years ago under a desert sun, and a promise no one else had heard. The doctor noticed the movement, almost by accident, her eyes following the line of Rex's focus, lingering there for a moment longer than she intended, before she shook her head slightly, dismissing it as coincidence, as instinct, as anything but meaning. But Rex didn't look away. Seconds passed, then minutes, the room growing heavier with each one, until the faint rhythm of the monitor seemed louder than it should have been, each beep echoing in the quiet like a countdown no one could stop. Ethan's hand twitched once, barely noticeable, a flicker of movement that might have been nothing, might have been everything, but Rex saw it. His ears lifted higher, his body leaning forward just a fraction, as if pulled by something invisible, something only he could sense. And for the first time that night, a low sound escaped him, not a bark, not a whine, but something deeper, something that vibrated in his chest like a warning waiting to be heard. The doctor froze, her hand hovering over the 4-line, her eyes shifting back to the dog, to the intensity in that stare, to the strange, unshakable certainty in it. And for a moment, just a moment, doubt slipped into the place where training had always lived. Because 20 doctors had looked at this man and seen nothing they could fix. But the dog was still looking like there was something there. The sound lingered longer than it should have, low and steady, like a warning carried through bone instead of air, and it made the young doctor hesitate in a way her training had never allowed before, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched Rex hold his gaze on that same spot. The tattoo on Ethan's right arm, the inked outline of a German shepherd that had once been a symbol of loyalty, but now seemed to anchor something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface that no machine had managed to detect. And for a moment the room felt different, charged in a quiet, unsettling way, as if the answer had been there all along, but no one had known how to see it. She stepped closer, slower this time, her focus shifting away from the monitors and back to the man, to the subtle details that had been overshadowed by charts and data and protocols, her fingers hovering just above the skin where Rex kept staring, not touching yet, just observing, as if waiting for something to reveal itself without being forced. "What is it, buddy?" she murmured under her breath, the question not meant for anyone else in the room. But Rex responded anyway, his posture tightening, his nose lifting slightly as he inhaled again, deeper this time, deliberate, like he was confirming something only he understood, and then he let out that same low sound, not louder, but sharper, more insistent, a line drawn in the silence that could not be ignored twice. The nurse shifted uneasily near the door, glancing between the doctor and the dog, unsure whether to intervene or step back, because this was not how medicine was supposed to work, not guided by instinct, not led by an animal. And yet there was something about the certainty in Rex that made it difficult to dismiss him as just a presence in the room. The doctor exhaled slowly, her mind turning over everything she had been taught, everything she knew about symptoms and causes and patterns, and none of it fit. None of it explained why a trained canine would lock onto a single point with that level of focus, hour after hour, without distraction, without fatigue, as if he was guarding more than a body, as if he was guarding a truth. She reached out then, finally, placing her fingers lightly against Ethan's arm, right over the faded ink, pressing just enough to feel beneath the skin, not expecting anything. And for a second there was nothing, just warmth, just stillness, and then she felt it, faint, almost imperceptible, something that did not belong to muscle or bone, something rigid, buried deeper than it should have been, and her breath caught before she could stop it. She pressed again, more carefully, tracing the area, her expression shifting from uncertainty to focus, to something sharper, something awake, and Rex leaned forward at the same moment, as if he had been waiting for that exact realization, his tail still, his body held tight with anticipation, not fear, not anxiety, but something closer to relief. "There is something here," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else, but the words carried enough weight to change the air in the room, to pull the nurse a step closer, to draw attention away from the steady rhythm of the monitor and back to the man who had been slipping away without explanation. She glanced at the chart again, scanning the notes, the scans, the reports, every line that confirmed there was nothing there, and yet her fingers told her otherwise, a contradiction that made her pulse quicken in a way she had not felt since her first year in residency, when every case had felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved instead of a system to be followed. "How did we miss this?" she whispered, the question hanging unanswered as she stepped back, already reaching for the call button, already knowing this would change everything, that whatever had been hidden beneath that layer of skin was not just an anomaly, it was the reason, the missing piece that had been overlooked by 20 sets of trained eyes, but not by the one presence in the room that had never relied on charts or machines to understand what was wrong. Rex exhaled slowly, the tension in his body easing just a fraction, but he did not look away, not yet, because for him the job was not finished, not until the man on that bed opened his eyes again, not until the silence between those monitor beeps was filled with something stronger than uncertainty, something that felt like a return. Outside, the hallway lights flickered slightly as the hour crept closer to morning, the world continuing on in quiet indifference. But inside that room, something had shifted, something small but undeniable, like the first crack of light before sunrise, and it had come not from expertise, not from experience, but from a loyalty that refused to accept an ending no one else could see. The room did not stay quiet for long after that realization, because once doubt breaks through certainty, it does not close again easily, and within minutes the soft rhythm of the night shifted into something more urgent, more focused, as footsteps returned down the hallway. quicker now, purposeful, carrying with them the weight of reconsideration, of second looks, of a possibility that should not have been missed but somehow was. And the young doctor stood at the center of it, her voice steady, but edged with something sharper as she explained what she had felt, what the dog had shown her without words, her hand hovering again over that same place on Ethan's arm, as if it might disappear if she looked away too long. Another physician stepped forward, older, more experienced, his expression guarded in the way of someone who has seen too many false leads to trust the first sign of hope. But even he could not ignore the stillness of the dog, the unwavering focus, the way Rex tracked every movement with quiet intensity, not anxious, not reactive, just certain, and that certainty carried a weight none of them could explain, but all of them felt. "Show me," the older doctor said, his tone measured, professional, but softer than before, and the young doctor guided his hand to the spot, pressing gently, then firmer, until his brow tightened ever so slightly, the smallest crack in his composure, the moment when experience meets something it cannot immediately categorize. And for a second he did not speak, did not confirm, did not deny, he just felt it, the same subtle resistance beneath the skin, the same presence that should not have been there. The monitors continued their steady rhythm behind them, indifferent to the shift in understanding, but the room itself seemed to lean closer, as if waiting for the next decision to be made. "We need imaging again," he said finally, his voice lower now, no longer dismissive, and the nurse moved quickly, already preparing, already adjusting the lines and equipment with practiced hands, while Rex remained exactly where he had been, his eyes never leaving Ethan, as if every second still mattered, as if this window of realization could close just as quickly as it had opened. The gurney was brought in with quiet efficiency, the wheels rolling softly over the polished floor, and as they prepared to move Ethan, Rex stepped closer, just enough to keep within reach, his nose brushing lightly against the edge of the bed for the briefest moment, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not watching closely, but it carried something deeper, something like reassurance, something like a promise. The hallway lights seemed brighter now as they moved, the hum of the hospital growing louder with each turn, monitors beeping in distant rooms, voices echoing faintly, life continuing all around them, while this single path narrowed toward an answer that had nearly been lost. In the imaging room, the air felt cooler, sharper, filled with the quiet precision of machines that rarely made mistakes. And yet even here there was hesitation, a second look, a recalibration of what they were searching for, because now they were not just looking for damage or disease, they were looking for something hidden, something deliberate, something that had learned how to remain unseen. Rex was held just outside the doorway, not restrained, not forced, but guided gently by the nurse who had earlier tried to move him away, and this time he allowed it, but only just, his body angled toward the room, his ears tuned to every sound beyond the door, every shift in tone, every change in rhythm, as if he could still follow what was happening without needing to see it. Inside, the machine began its quiet work, scanning layer by layer, deeper than before, slower, more precise, and the doctor watched the screen with a focus that bordered on disbelief, her earlier doubt replaced now by something closer to urgency, her eyes tracing each image as it formed, searching, waiting, until finally it appeared, small, almost insignificant at first glance, a faint irregularity where there should have been none, a detail that could have been dismissed if not for the context, if not for the dog that refused to look anywhere else. "There," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried through the room like a turning point, and the older doctor leaned in, his expression shifting again, this time not with doubt, but with recognition, with the quiet acceptance that something had indeed been missed, something that did not follow the rules they had trusted. Outside, Rex let out a slow breath, his body relaxing just a fraction, not fully, not yet, but enough to suggest that whatever he had been holding on to, whatever he had sensed long before anyone else, had finally been seen, and for the first time since the night began, the silence in the hallway did not feel like an ending, but like the space before something begins again. The image on the screen stayed there longer than anyone expected, not because it was unclear, but because it was undeniable, a small, foreign presence embedded beneath layers of tissue where nothing of the sort should have existed, something precise, deliberate, and almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. And for a moment no one spoke, because the silence carried a quiet admission that this had been missed, not once, but over and over again, by people trained to see what others could not. The older doctor exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the scan, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier certainty, as he said, "Prepare for immediate intervention." And the words shifted everything from observation to action, from question to response, as the team moved with renewed purpose, each motion sharper, more intentional, guided now by a clarity that had not existed before. Outside the imaging room, Rex lifted his head slightly, his ears angling forward as if he could hear the change in tone, the subtle difference between uncertainty and decision. And though the door remained closed, though he could not see what was happening inside, he felt it, something in the air, something in the rhythm of movement, and his body stilled again, waiting, always waiting. The gurney rolled back into the hallway, faster this time, not rushed, but urgent in a way that spoke of narrowing windows and fragile timing. And the nurse walked alongside, adjusting the lines, checking the monitors, her movements steady despite the quiet tension that had settled over everything, while the young doctor stayed close to Ethan's side, her eyes flicking between his face and the screen that tracked his vitals, as if willing them to hold just a little longer. Rex stepped forward as they passed, falling into position beside the bed without needing to be told, his presence no longer questioned, no longer seen as an interruption, but as something that belonged there, something that had already proven its place in the story unfolding around them. In the procedure room, the lights were brighter, focused, casting sharp clarity over every surface, every instrument arranged with precision, every movement guided by years of practice. But beneath that practiced calm, there was something new, something unspoken, an awareness that this moment existed because of something outside their usual understanding, because of a loyalty that had refused to accept the limits of their knowledge. The team worked in quiet coordination, voices low, deliberate, each instruction clear and measured, and the older doctor took his place at the center, his earlier skepticism replaced now by a steady resolve, his focus narrowed to the task at hand, to the small, hidden presence that had nearly gone unnoticed, that had nearly taken something they could not afford to lose. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, a constant reminder of what was at stake, each sound grounding the room in the present, in the fragile balance between decline and recovery. And the young doctor stood just beyond the immediate field, watching, her mind still replaying the moment Rex had refused to look away, the moment that had shifted everything, that had turned instinct into evidence, doubt into direction. Outside, the hallway felt quieter than before. The usual sounds softened as if the building itself was holding its breath, and Rex remained just beyond the doorway, guided there by the nurse but not restrained, his body angled toward the room, his gaze fixed on the narrow gap where light spilled out across the floor, his breathing slow, controlled, as if he understood that this part of the fight was no longer his to lead. But he would not leave it, not even now. Minutes stretched, each one carrying weight, each one marked by the steady passage of time that could not be paused. And inside the room the focus never wavered, every movement deliberate, every decision grounded in the knowledge that they were now addressing something real, something tangible, something that could finally be changed. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, the rhythm on the monitor shifted, not dramatically, not enough to draw immediate attention, but enough to be noticed by those who had been watching closely, a slight stabilization, a subtle correction, like a system beginning to right itself after being pushed off balance. And the older doctor glanced up briefly, his expression unchanged but his eyes sharper, more alert, as if acknowledging a response without yet trusting it. Outside, Rex's ears lifted again, his head tilting slightly, the tension in his body easing by a fraction, not fully, not yet, but enough to suggest that whatever he had been holding on to, whatever silent certainty had kept him anchored to that spot for hours, was beginning to shift, to move towards something different. The nurse standing beside him noticed it too, the change so small it could have been imagined, but after everything that had happened, nothing about this felt accidental anymore, and she reached out gently, resting her hand near his shoulder without touching, as if acknowledging his role in something she could not fully explain. The light from the procedure room remained steady, spilling into the hallway like a quiet promise. And for the first time since the night began, there was something else in the air besides uncertainty, something fragile but real, something that felt like the beginning of a return. Time moved differently inside that room, slower in a way that made every second feel like it carried weight, as if the space itself understood what was at stake and refused to rush past it. And the steady rhythm of the monitor continued, not strong yet, not stable enough to promise anything, but no longer slipping in the quiet, dangerous way it had before, and that alone was enough to change the air, to give shape to something that had not existed earlier in the night, something that felt almost like resistance, like a body remembering how to hold on. The older doctor remained focused, his hands steady, his attention fixed on the small, hidden object that had caused so much uncertainty. And now that it had been found, now that it had been addressed, the rest of the work followed with a clarity that had been missing before, as if the entire situation had finally aligned with something they understood, something they could respond to with skill instead of guesswork. Around him, the team moved in quiet coordination, no wasted motion, no unnecessary words, just the soft sounds of instruments, the controlled cadence of breath, and the constant presence of that monitor, marking time in a language that everyone in the room knew how to read. The young doctor watched closely, her earlier doubt replaced by a deep, focused attention, her eyes tracing every movement, every shift, as if she needed to see it all the way through, to understand how something so small could have caused such a silent unraveling, and how it had taken a presence outside of medicine to bring them back to the right path. Outside the doorway, Rex remained exactly where he had been, his body still but not tense, his ears relaxed just slightly, as if he could feel the change even without seeing it, as if the invisible thread that connected him to Ethan had shifted from strain to something steadier, something that no longer pulled at him with the same urgency. And yet he did not lie down, did not look away, because for him, this was not finished until Ethan opened his eyes again. The nurse beside him glanced down once, noticing the subtle difference, the way his breathing had evened out, the way his posture had softened by degrees so small they might have been missed earlier, and she found herself watching him now with a kind of quiet respect, not as a visitor in the hallway, but as something else entirely, something that had seen what no one else had. Inside, the older doctor paused for a brief moment, his gaze shifting to the monitor, watching the pattern more closely now, and there it was again, a slight strengthening, a steadiness that had not been present before, and though he did not speak it aloud, the acknowledgement passed through the room in the way his shoulders eased just a fraction, in the way the tension in the team began to release without anyone naming it. "Keep monitoring," he said quietly, his voice no longer edged with uncertainty, but grounded, certain in a way that only comes after something real has been found. And the young doctor nodded, her eyes moving to the readings, tracking each change with careful attention, as if each small improvement was something fragile that needed to be protected. Minutes passed, then more, and the rhythm continued to stabilize, not dramatically, not in a way that would make headlines, but in a way that mattered, in a way that signaled a turn, a shift away from decline and towards something that resembled recovery. And for the first time since Ethan had been brought in, the room did not feel like a place where an ending was being prepared, but a place where something was being given another chance. Outside, Rex slowly lowered himself to the floor, not collapsing, not surrendering, but settling, his body finally allowing a measure of rest. Though his head remained lifted, his eyes still fixed on that narrow strip of light beneath the door, and in that posture there was something deeply human, something that spoke of long hours and silent vigilance, of a bond that did not require words to be understood. The nurse knelt beside him then, careful not to startle him, her voice soft as she said, "You knew, did you not?" Not expecting an answer, not needing one, because the truth of it was already there, in the way he had refused to leave, in the way he had watched when everyone else had moved on, in the way he had held on to something no one else could see. Inside, the final steps of the procedure came to a close, the room settling into a quieter rhythm, the urgency easing into careful observation, and the older doctor stepped back slightly, his gaze lingering on Ethan for a moment longer than necessary, as if acknowledging the narrow space between what had almost been lost and what had been reclaimed. The monitor continued its steady cadence, each sound now carrying a different meaning, not a countdown, but a continuation, and though no one said it aloud, though no one declared it as certainty, the shift was there, undeniable, like the first breath after being held under too long. And in the hallway, beneath the soft glow of the overhead lights, Rex closed his eyes for just a moment, not in exhaustion, but in something quieter, something closer to trust, as if he believed, finally, that the fight was turning in their favor. The hours that followed did not rush forward the way anyone might have hoped, because recovery, real recovery, does not arrive all at once. It settles in slowly, quietly, like light finding its way into a room that has been dark for too long. And inside the ICU, the atmosphere had changed from urgency to vigilance, from action to watchfulness, where every sound mattered and every small shift was noted, measured, and held with cautious expectation. Ethan lay still beneath the dimmed lights, the harsh brightness of the procedure room replaced now with a softer glow that seemed almost respectful, as if the space itself recognized the fragile line he had crossed back over. And the monitors beside him continued their steady rhythm, no longer erratic, no longer slipping, but not yet strong enough to be taken for granted, each beat a quiet statement that he was still there, still holding on. The young doctor remained nearby, her posture relaxed in appearance but attentive in every detail, her eyes moving between the readings and Ethan's face, searching for any sign, any subtle indication that the change within him was beginning to surface outward. And though there was no dramatic movement, no sudden awakening, there was something else, something quieter, something that only those who had been watching closely could recognize, a steadiness that had not existed before, a kind of internal balance, returning piece by piece. Outside the room, the hallway had grown quieter as the night gave way to early morning, the faintest hint of gray light beginning to press against the windows at the far end, signaling a transition that felt almost symbolic, as if the world beyond the hospital was beginning again just as something inside these walls was doing the same. Rex remained close, no longer tense, no longer rigid with that earlier urgency, but still present in a way that felt unwavering, his body resting now, but his awareness never fully fading, his ears still tuned to the subtle sounds that drifted through the door, the quiet beeps, the low voices, the movement of people who now carried a different kind of energy, less burdened, more hopeful, though none of them would have said it out loud. The nurse stepped out briefly, her gaze falling on Rex as she paused, her expression softening in a way that had nothing to do with protocol or procedure, but everything to do with recognition, because there was no chart, no report, no measurable data that could fully account for what had brought them to this moment, and yet it stood there in front of her, quiet, steady, breathing in rhythm with a man who had not yet opened his eyes, but was no longer slipping away. She crouched slightly, careful, respectful of the space he held, and for a moment she simply watched him, noticing the details she had overlooked before, the way his chest rose and fell evenly now, the way his muscles no longer held that tight, coiled readiness. And there was something almost humbling in it, the realization that while they had been searching through machines and scans, he had simply stayed, watched, and known. Inside, the young doctor adjusted one of the monitors, her movements precise, her focus steady, and as she did, she noticed something small, something so subtle it could have been dismissed if she had not been paying such close attention, a slight change in Ethan's breathing, a deeper inhale, a pause, and then another, more controlled, more deliberate, as if his body was beginning to take ownership again, to move from passive survival to something more active, something that resembled return. She leaned in slightly, her voice low, almost instinctive as she spoke. "You are still with us," not expecting a response, not demanding one, just placing the words into the space as if they might find their way to him somehow. And though there was no immediate answer, no movement of his eyes or hands, the monitor responded in its own quiet way, the rhythm holding steady, unwavering, like a confirmation that did not need translation. Minutes turned into longer stretches, the kind that test patience, that ask for trust without offering immediate reward, and yet no one left, not the doctor, not the nurse, and certainly not Rex, who remained just beyond the threshold, his presence a constant, a silent promise that he would be there for whatever came next. whether it was minutes or hours or something longer. And then, without warning, but not without meaning, Ethan's fingers shifted, just slightly. A movement so small it might have been missed by anyone not watching for it. But the young doctor saw it, her breath catching for a fraction of a second before she leaned closer, her eyes fixed on his hand, waiting, and there it was again, a faint, deliberate motion, not random, not reflex, but something more intentional, something that suggested awareness returning from a distance no one else could measure. Outside, Rex's head lifted instantly, his ears forward, his body rising from the floor in one smooth motion, as if some invisible signal had reached him at the exact moment it happened, and he stepped closer to the door, not pushing through, not breaking the boundary, but holding there, alert, ready, because for him, this was the moment he had been waiting for, not the procedure, not the discovery, but this, the first sign that the man he had refused to leave was finding his way back. The movement did not stop at the hand. It lingered there for a moment as if testing the weight of the world again. And then, slowly, almost reluctantly, Ethan's breathing changed, deeper now, more deliberate, no longer the passive rhythm of a body being carried by machines, but something that felt chosen, something that belonged to him. And the young doctor leaned closer, her voice softer this time, steadier, as if she understood that whatever was happening now required patience more than urgency. "Ethan," she said gently, not loud, not demanding, just present, the way someone speaks to a person who might be listening from far away. And for a moment nothing followed, just the steady hum of the room, the quiet beeping that had become the background of everything. But then his fingers moved again, slightly stronger this time, curling just enough to suggest intention, and that was when the shift became undeniable. The nurse stepped closer, her eyes widening just a fraction, her breath catching before she could hide it, because after hours of stillness, even the smallest sign of return carries the weight of something profound, something that cannot be measured in charts or numbers alone. Outside the door, Rex was already standing, his body aligned with the threshold, his ears forward, his gaze fixed, and though he could not see the movement inside, he felt it, something in the air, something in the silence that had changed, and he took one step closer, then another, stopping just short of crossing the line, as if he understood the boundary but refused to lose proximity to what mattered. Inside, Ethan's eyelids fluttered, barely noticeable at first, a faint tremor beneath the surface, and the doctor held her breath, watching, waiting, not wanting to interrupt whatever fragile process was unfolding. And then it happened again, slower this time, more controlled, like someone pushing against a heavy door from the other side. "That is it," she whispered, not to him, not to anyone, just to the moment itself, and the nurse reached for the monitor instinctively, her eyes scanning the readings, confirming what they were already seeing, that the rhythm was holding, that the system was responding, that this was not a random flicker, but something real, something building. Ethan's lips parted slightly, a shallow breath escaping, and though no words came, the effort alone spoke volumes, the attempt itself a declaration that he was no longer drifting beyond reach, that he was finding his way back step by step, breath by breath. The doctor moved just a little closer, careful not to overwhelm, her voice low, steady, grounding. "You are safe," she said, each word placed gently into the space, not as instruction, but as reassurance, as something to hold on to if he could hear it, if some part of him was already reaching toward it. Outside, Rex let out a slow breath, his body easing in a way that had not happened since the night began, and for the first time, his tail moved, not in excitement, not in relief, but in something quieter, something measured, like a recognition that the balance had shifted, that the invisible weight he had been carrying was beginning to lift. The nurse by the door noticed it, the subtle change, and she allowed herself a small, quiet smile, not broad, not celebratory, but real, because she had seen enough to know that moments like this do not come easily, that they are earned through hours of uncertainty, through decisions made without guarantees, through something that sometimes cannot be explained at all. Inside, Ethan's eyes opened, just a fraction at first, unfocused, adjusting to the light, to the shape of the room, to the presence of figures around him that he could not yet fully recognize, and the doctor did not rush him, did not flood him with questions. She simply stayed there, steady, letting him arrive at his own pace, letting the moment unfold without pressure. His gaze shifted slightly, slow, searching, and though it passed over the equipment, the lights, the ceiling above, it did not settle until it reached the door, until it found the shape that had been there all along, waiting, watching, refusing to leave. Rex stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Ethan, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them that did not need words, did not need explanation, something built over time, over shared moments, over trust that had never once been broken, and Ethan's expression softened, just slightly, a small change that carried more meaning than any spoken sentence could have. His hand moved again, lifting just enough to rest against his chest, near the edge of that faded tattoo, the outline of the dog that had once been inked as a symbol, but now felt like something more, something real, something that had reached beyond skin and memory and into the moment that had just passed. The doctor followed his gaze, her eyes shifting to Rex, and for a brief second, she allowed herself to acknowledge it fully, not as coincidence, not as chance, but as something that had mattered, something that had changed the outcome in a way no textbook could account for. And she nodded once, quietly, not to anyone in particular, but to the truth of what had happened. The room settled into a different kind of silence now, not heavy, not uncertain, but calm, steady, filled with the quiet presence of a man who had come back from somewhere just beyond reach, and a dog who had never once stopped believing he would. The light in the room shifted slowly as morning began to settle in, not with any dramatic change, but with a soft brightness that crept across the walls and softened the edges of everything it touched. And for the first time since the night had begun, the space no longer felt suspended between uncertainty and loss. It felt grounded, steady, like something had been restored that could not easily be taken again. Ethan's eyes remained open now, not wide, not fully alert, but present, aware in a way that carried quiet effort, as if each second required him to relearn something simple, something once automatic. And yet he did not turn away from it. He held on, his gaze still drawn toward the doorway where Rex stood, unwavering, patient, as if time had never mattered to him in the first place. The young doctor stepped back slightly, giving him space, her posture relaxed now in a way it had not been before, the tension replaced by a careful calm. And though she continued to monitor the readings, her focus had shifted, no longer searching for signs of decline, but watching the slow, steady return of someone who had nearly slipped beyond reach. "Take your time," she said softly, her voice no longer urgent, no longer edged with concern, but steady, reassuring, and Ethan's breathing responded, deeper now, more controlled, as if the words had reached him in a place beyond sound, guiding him back with a quiet clarity. The nurse adjusted the line at his side, her movements gentle, respectful of the moment, and for a brief second she glanced toward the door, toward the dog who had remained through every phase of the night, through every moment of doubt and every shift in understanding. And there was something in her expression that spoke of recognition, not just of what had happened, but of what it meant. Rex stepped forward then, slowly, not rushing, not breaking the stillness of the room, but moving with a deliberate calm that mirrored Ethan's own return. And when he crossed the threshold, no one stopped him, no one questioned it, because at that point, there was nothing left to question. He approached the bed and paused, just for a moment, his eyes meeting Ethan's again, and in that silence, there was something complete, something that did not need explanation or confirmation, something that had already proven itself in ways no one in the room could deny. Ethan's hand lifted slightly, the movement small but intentional, and Rex responded immediately, stepping closer, lowering his head just enough for that hand to rest against his fur, and the contact was gentle, steady, a connection that carried more meaning than any words could have held. The doctor watched quietly, not interrupting, not analyzing, just witnessing, because there are moments in medicine that do not belong to data or diagnosis, moments that exist outside of what can be measured, and this was one of them. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, each sound now a reassurance instead of a warning, and the room settled into a calm that felt earned, not given, something that had been built through hours of uncertainty and held together by something far less tangible than skill alone. Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at Rex, his lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came, not yet, and perhaps they were not needed, because the understanding between them had never depended on language. It had always existed in something quieter, something deeper, something that had carried them through more than anyone else in that room could fully understand. The nurse stepped back, allowing the space to remain undisturbed, and the young doctor exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing as she glanced once more at the readings, confirming what they already knew, that the crisis had passed, that the path ahead, while still uncertain, was no longer slipping away from them. Outside the window, the early morning light grew stronger, casting a warm glow across the floor, reaching toward the bed, toward the man who had come back, and toward the dog who had never left. And in that quiet, steady brightness, the room felt different, not just safer, but whole in a way it had not been before. Rex remained by Ethan's side, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his breath, his presence no longer marked by urgency or tension, but by something steadier, something that felt like completion, like the end of a long watch finally giving way to rest. And Ethan's hand stayed where it was, resting against him, grounded, real, as if holding on to something that had guided him back through the silence. No one spoke for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because anything spoken would have felt unnecessary. And in that shared quiet, something settled into place, something that did not need to be explained to be understood, a simple, undeniable truth that had revealed itself not through expertise or certainty, but through loyalty that had refused to look away. Recovery did not arrive as a single moment. It unfolded slowly across the hours that followed, in small, steady steps that carried more weight than any sudden change ever could. And as the morning settled fully into the day, the room no longer held the tension of uncertainty, but the quiet rhythm of something being rebuilt, piece by piece, breath by breath, with care and patience guiding every movement. Ethan remained awake now, not fully strong, not yet ready to sit or speak with clarity, but present in a way that could not be mistaken, his eyes following the world around him with growing focus, adjusting to the light, to the shapes, to the presence of people who had been there through the longest night of his life. And through it all, his attention returned again and again to the one constant that had never changed. Rex did not move far, even when the nurses came and went, even when the doctor stepped in to check his vitals or adjust the equipment. He stayed close, always within reach, his body calm, his breathing even, no longer driven by urgency, but by something steadier, something that felt like fulfillment, like a duty carried through to its end without hesitation or doubt. The young doctor stood at the foot of the bed for a moment, reviewing the latest readings, her expression composed but thoughtful, as if she was still tracing back through everything that had happened, still measuring the distance between what had nearly been lost and what had been returned. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost reflective. "We nearly missed it," she said, not to anyone in particular, but the words settled into the room with a weight that did not need to be explained, because everyone there understood exactly what she meant. The nurse nodded slightly, her gaze shifting toward Rex, and though she did not add anything, her expression carried the rest of the thought, the part that did not need to be spoken aloud, the part that had already been proven. Ethan shifted slightly against the bed, the movement slow but deliberate, and the doctor stepped closer, her attention returning immediately to him, her voice gentle as she said, "You are doing well." And this time, there was a response, not in words, not yet, but in the way his eyes focused more clearly, in the way his breathing remained steady, in the way his hand moved again, reaching not toward the equipment or the edge of the bed, but toward Rex, finding him without needing to search. Rex responded in the same quiet way he always had, stepping closer, lowering his head, just enough to meet that hand. And for a moment, everything else in the room seemed to fade into the background, the monitors, the voices, the movement, all of it becoming secondary to the simple, steady connection between them. Outside the window, the sunlight had grown stronger, casting long, warm lines across the floor, touching the edge of the bed, reaching toward them both. And in that light, the room felt less like a place of crisis and more like something else entirely, something calmer, something grounded, something that held the quiet aftermath of a battle that had not been fought with force, but with presence. with patience, with something that refused to give up when there was no clear reason to hope. The older doctor stepped in briefly, his expression composed but thoughtful, his eyes moving from Ethan to Rex and back again. And though he did not say much, there was a shift in the way he carried himself, a subtle acknowledgement that what had happened here did not fit neatly into the frameworks he had relied on for years, and that perhaps not everything that matters can be seen the first time, or even the 20th. He gave a small nod, more to the moment than to anyone in particular, and then stepped back, allowing the space to remain undisturbed. Time continued to move, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, and with each passing hour, Ethan's strength returned in quiet increments, his awareness sharpening, his presence becoming more solid, more certain, and through it all, Rex remained exactly what he had always been, not a hero in the way people often imagine, not loud, not dramatic, but constant, unwavering. The kind of presence that does not ask to be seen but cannot be overlooked once it is understood. By the time the afternoon light began to soften again, the room had settled into a calm that felt complete, not because everything was finished, but because the most uncertain part had passed, and what remained was the slow, steady work of healing, something that no longer felt fragile, something that felt possible. Ethan's gaze lifted once more, meeting Rex's, and this time, there was a clarity in it that had not been there before, a quiet recognition, and though his voice had not yet returned, though no words had been spoken, the meaning was there all the same, carried in the stillness, in the way his hand remained against Rex's fur, in the way neither of them needed anything more to understand what had happened. And in that quiet, steady space, beneath the soft hum of machines and the gentle light of the day, there was a truth that settled without being spoken, simple and undeniable, that sometimes what saves a life is not what we see first, not what we measure or predict, but what stays, what watches, what refuses to turn away even when everything else does.